Hello, I'm Sindy, and welcome to my podcast, Sindy on Seduction. For my very first interview, I had the absolute pleasure of speaking with author and seduction guru Frank B Kermit. As well as offering workshops and private consultations, Frank has written the books From Loser to Seducer, the story of Frank B Kermit, as well as the book Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test. Within part one of our interview, yes, there are two parts, Frank, who has been part of the seduction community for years, shares his own personal experiences and gives some very wise and useful advice for those men who are wanting to connect with women. I know that when I talked to Frank, I found the interview really quite fascinating and I learned a great deal. I hope you do as well. I know from things that I've heard you speak of in interviews, you mentioned two significant experiences in your life. One was being stood up at the prom, and another was the ending of a relationship you had with a woman that you were in love with who ended up marrying somebody else. And you've spoke about those two situations a great deal, but what comes to my mind is, how did you get over that? Wouldn't it be fair to say that oftentimes with both men and women, that when you experience such pain and rejection, it's really difficult to turn that around and then go out into the world and start taking risks again? Can you tell me about that time in your life when you did consciously choose to turn it around, and what happened once you did turn it around?
Sure. The first thing that I did is that I took responsibility for my own actions. The two incidents you were talking about, getting stood up at my prom, then that was strike one. Strike two was losing my ex-fiancée to one of my closest friends. We had been together for 3 years on and off. And number three, there was a girl I hung out with for about 2 years who always insisted she and I could never date because we were of different races and cultures. And after 2 years of hanging out with her and spending money to be with her, she ended up marrying somebody who was of a different race and culture. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, what I call my strike three, that was it. I just went home that night and I kept saying, you know what, this keeps happening to me. And the one common element in all those relationships was me.
Right.
So up until that point, I was saying things like, oh, well, you know, the girl who stood me up on my prom, she was just a screwed up girl and I didn't know any better. Oh, well, in my relationship with my ex-fiancée, I could blame the guy for saying, you know, he knew what he was doing, he was stabbing me in the back, and she knew what she was doing, and I could go ahead and blame them, or I could even blame myself and say, well, maybe I made these mistakes, and if I didn't make these mistakes, none of this would have happened. When it happened a third time, mm-hmm. I really had to say no. It's none of anybody else's fault. The one common element in all this is me. So the first thing I had to do is say, okay, this is all my fault. Because by saying that it's my fault and taking responsibility for it, I'm actually in a position to fix it.
But before you go on though, did you have a moment in time, because I think a lot of people would have looked at the situation and thought, maybe turned it inward and said, maybe I'm not good looking enough. Maybe I just don't make enough money. Maybe I'm not smart enough.
Oh, of course. But that was throughout the whole process.
Okay.
When this thing happened with the third girl, at that point, I had gotten a job in my industry. I was making enough money that, you know, when we were going out, I was paying for everything. This particular girl, without getting into too much detail, was not allowed to work in Canada at that time. So she wasn't making an income. So, I mean, I had the money. I had a car at the time. I had a pretty good life. I had other things going for me. Did I worry that I wasn't good looking enough? Of course. Going through something like that, everybody, men or women, are going to have doubts about themselves. But I've always been the type of person that I said, you know what, yeah, I know that I'm overweight, I know I'm not really great looking, but I still can find love. And it's a belief I had. What I could not find was someone who loved me as much as I may have loved them. So rather than turn it inwards on myself and say, well, this is just never going to happen to me, that was not acceptable to me. I had put it in my head that if this wasn't ever going to happen to me, I was going to kill myself. Because I'm not going to live a life where you have to understand something. As egotistical as this may sound, I see myself as a good person. I see myself as trying to do good things in the world. I don't go around hurting people. I've made mistakes in my life, and in making mistakes, I've probably hurt a friend or two along the way, and I punish myself more for that than anybody else can. But the fact is that I believe that good people should and can find love. So to be hit with the reality that sometimes nice guys really do finish last was just unacceptable for me. So I said, if this is the case, what's the point of having a wall filled with awards and degrees and accolades and times I've appeared in the media, because I was in a certain career where that was on an ongoing basis. What's the point of that if I have no one to share it with? And that prospect just said, if that's what life is about, then I've done everything I've set out to accomplish. What's left? And what was left was trying to find someone to share it with. If I can't make that happen, then what's the point? So the motivation I had really was that it was really a life and death situation. Fix this part of my life, get over whatever it is I have to get over, or at least deal with it on some level, and move on, or I'm going to die.
So how did you begin?
The first thing I did is that I just accepted responsibility, saying, okay, everything I've done right up until now, everything that's happened to me is all my fault, which puts me in a position, like I said, where I could fix it. I made a decision that the most important thing for me would be to figure out relationships, whether we were talking about picking up women, maintaining a relationship, what works, what doesn't. After everything I'd been through, especially the experience with my ex-fiancée, I was petrified of divorce. To this day, I'm still not pleased with the idea that it's always possible. I'm scared of divorce, and I didn't want to ever go through a divorce. I've seen too many people's lives be destroyed, and not only financially, but I'm talking emotionally. I've dated women who have emotional scars from their divorces. One woman in particular, and she'll always have a place in my heart. She was in a relationship, she was married, and her husband one day decides that he's actually gay. And this, just so hurt her that even when I dated her years later after this incident happened, it was still a factor in her ability to trust men and trust people in general. And I just look at that and I say, no, I don't ever want to go through something like that.
Or I would say, sorry for interrupting, but did you also make the decision that you didn't want to be like that either, in the sense of that you didn't want to have to carry